Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We're going to take a look at a few aspects of the Kamala Harris defeat. First of all, she did give her concession speech, so we have a little bit of that. Also, some of the various competing theories of what exactly went wrong. Also, a lot of finger pointing. People on both sides that are like Biden, Democratic Party, like his staffers versus the Harris staffers and the Obama staffers. So a lot of blame flying around, including people who are still, I knew this would happen, credulously like, geez, we shouldn't have ditched Biden. Biden could have won. That was a mistake.
Yep, that was
wild
it from all
wild
along.
To imagine that could be the case. But anyway, we'll dig into all of that. We're also going to have David Sirota on, of course, of Lever News. Bernie Sanders put out a really scathing rebuke of the Democratic Party, echoes some of the things I've been saying, some of the things others have been saying about where they went wrong, and very curious to get Sirota's take on that. And there's also been a funny development of people like David Brooks now being like, gee, maybe Democrats need like their own Bernie Sanders style disruptive movement. Yeah. It's like, dude, you were a core part of destroying that movement, crushing it, salting the earth, and making sure that there's no vestige of it left to be resurrected. And of course, even if it were to be, we know David Brooks would be at the vanguard of once again doing the same exact thing. So anyway, excited to talk to David Sirota about all of those
that'll
things.
Be fun.
And
forgive
his thoughts.
Forgive us for more truncated, spontaneous, extemporaneous show today. All of us are still recovering from all of the sleep deprivation over the last couple of days. We're going to do our best here. Let's start, I think, with the Kamala Harris speech. So, control room, please go ahead and get that queued up, and we will take a listen to some of the highlights. I watched the entire thing, and we'll break it down after. Let's take a listen.
An historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service. HU. And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
About as perfect as an end to the campaign as we could get there in that concession speech, Krystal, pablum and whatever the hell that was.
The vibes are very
about
like,
the stars.
Yeah, I mean, the vibes to me are very like 2016 Resistance Lib.
Man.
And, I don't think that the energy from the Democratic base is going to be quite the same. Because, I mean, for one, they're exhausted, right?
Yeah.
And for number two, back in 2016, it felt like it could be just a one-off.
Yes.
Like a fluke. Okay, you had the Comey thing, and Hillary was a bad candidate, and Russian interference, and whatever. Now it's like, no, this wasn't a fluke. By the way, people aren't just rejecting Democrats. They're doing that. They're also embracing this particular candidate. I mean, he outperformed every Republican on the ballot.
Yes.
So let's reckon with that, too, and what that says. But, on the Democratic side, I see Elizabeth Warren put out like kind of a similar vibe of statement that was like, let's not point fingers. It's like, when is the time to point fingers? If not right now. Like
Matt Stoller had a great tweet. He was like, actually, right now is the exact right time to point fingers and for recriminations, bitter recriminations.
Now is the time. Your party has been burned down to the ashes.
Yes.
Thoroughly repudiated in state after state, county after county, demographic group after demographic group across the country. And there's no one to blame. There's no one, there's no boogeyman out there that you can just point your finger at and say, oh, it was their fault. So, now is the time to try to learn those lessons. But, I think that they will learn all the wrong lessons. I think that's already, we see them moving in that direction. But the other piece with Kamala's speech, I'm curious your thoughts. I think she's delusional enough to believe that she's still part of the future of the Democratic Party.
That's actually what I wanted to highlight. So an important part of her speech actually was her really laying the groundwork for the possible future run. So I have a direct quote here. Kamala, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. And she says, I'm so proud of the race that we ran, the way that we ran it. We have been intentional about building community and building coalitions. But the most important was really about the not conceding the fight and continuing, or not conceding, I'm conceding the election, not conceding the fight. And I really do think that she is trying to position herself as a future of the resistance. And this is actually a very stupid bet, in my opinion, because it's like you just said, the quote unquote resistance is not going to be the same. Last time around, they had two pillars that they could correctly cling to.
Right.
I'm sorry, one was correct, the other was bullshit.
Delusional.
The first one was the popular vote and the one-off thing, right? I mean, that's fair, right? You actually did win the popular vote. Hillary did. So they could talk about that. They're like, well, it wasn't a rejection of us. It was just a couple of ways. The swing state, Trump is a one-off, et cetera. Number two also was Russiagate, is they were like, this is fundamentally like an illegitimate president. But so obviously Russiagate turned out to be bullshit. And also, frankly, the entire like, this is a one-off thing is also turned out to be bullshit. So when you put those two things together, she is making a very incorrect bet. Let's be very honest here. This is a candidate who has performed worse than Hillary Clinton, right? This is a candidate who was thoroughly rejected by the popular vote and a landslide victory in the Electoral College. You know, in the British system, somebody like her, it's over. You resign. You're gone. You know, at best, you pop up somewhere for constabulatory or whatever they call it over there, and that's it. You're just some backbencher, and we never hear about you again. Fundamentally, it's an incorrect bet because it's like you just said, the liberal mind and all that is both exhausted from 8 years of quote unquote resistance, but also there is a baseline acceptance this time of the Trump victory and of the thesis that this is, you know, Peter Baker over at the New York Times, he's a guy I respect. He does a pretty good job. And he was like, look, elites made a fundamental bet that Trump is not who we are. And he's like, actually, this is Donald Trump's America, and we are the ones who don't know what the hell is going on. It's kind of a trite take, but fundamentally, like what Kamala is betting on in terms of her resistance, it cannot look like her because her style of politics so thoroughly failed. Her entire theory of quote-unquote resistance was incorrect from basically the entire time around. So whatever does come next, obviously there's going to be a lot of soul-searching and like that inside of the party, but she cannot seek the nomination again because her electoral track record now is 2 times failure. She failed in the 2019 Democratic primary. She did not win or even get close to the Iowa caucuses because of how she flamed out. For some reason, mostly because of like 2020 BLM craziness, she gets selected as the vice presidential pick. One of the worst modern picks, obviously, I think we can say. And then there's no primary system that happens, and she runs a terrible campaign in addition to having inherit the baggage of Joe Biden, and she loses in a historic margin. Like, it is over. And in any modern sense of like how these things should go, it cannot be allowed. Now, the big question is whether Democratic elites will allow this nonsense, because right now, all the recriminations are on Joe Biden, which we'll get to, but I haven't seen enough of Kamala herself and her own role in it. So she seems to think that she can just coast on it was Biden's fault that I lost, not mine.
I've been saying the whole time that Democrats are never going to run a woman again.
Right.
And I do think like the first woman president is going to be a Republican. Like I think that is pretty clear at this point. But I mean, I agree with all the critiques of Kamala's campaign, right? I mean, the thing I've been saying is like too much Mark Cuban and Liz Cheney and not enough Sean Fain and Bernie Sanders, right? But I think it's sort of unfair to lay all the blame at her feet because it would almost be too easy to just look at like, oh, you made this tactical wrong decision. You gave this tactically wrong answer. All of that is, you know, worthy of debate and discussion, et cetera. But there's a deeper problem with the Democratic Party. And, you know, the medium-term issue is that even though they claim to be fighting for democracy, they're actually very scared of democracy, which you see both in the refusal to have a Democratic primary this time around, in the refusal to have like even an open convention after Joe Biden drops out of the race. If you go back further, You see it in the crushing of the Bernie Sanders movement, an organic grassroots Democratic movement that sprung up, that they moved heaven and earth to make sure that they crushed and put their finger on the scales and rigged the primaries back in 2016. And if you think about it, the last time that they actually allowed a democratic process to play out was 2008 with Obama and Hillary.
Yep.
They got the candidate that the Democratic base actually wanted, and lo and behold, turned out that guy was a really good politician, and he won 2 terms, and probably, if he'd been allowed to run for more, probably would have continued to win. And I say this not as the biggest fan of Obama, but just respect of his particular political talent. So there's a democracy problem in the Democratic Party. I really don't see anyone reckoning with that. But there's also an ideological problem in the Democratic Party. And, Kamala is reflective of that ideological problem. Neoliberalism has been rejected. The right has offered through Trumpism their vision and their story about what went wrong and what to do next. The left offered out of Occupy their own version of that story of, who was to blame, what went wrong, and how to fix it. And it was compelling. It was compelling to a lot of the very same people who now are supporting Donald Trump, including like Joe Rogan being the sort of figurehead of that shift, but many Latino voters, many working class voters, et cetera. And, I would love to fantasize that, now they're going to realize the error of their ways and there's going to be a new movement that springs up. But I just don't believe it, because they've already crushed that movement so thoroughly. The people who previously were part of it, many of them are gone. They're disillusioned. They're either just liberals now, or they're on the right. And so I don't know, there is no left to speak of that could recreate that energy. So, that's where we are. One thing, Saagar, I wanted to get your view on is, let's put this incumbent party graphic up on the screen, guys, the second element that we have here.
Yeah, this is very important.
This is important, and it is an important part of the story of what went wrong here. This is Derek Thompson tweeted this out, and he said, for the first time since World War II, every governing party facing election in a developed country this year lost vote share. 2024 Democrats are the red dot, absolutely critical context to any postmortem. And I think that is true, but I also think that you can use that to just explain away the failures of Kamala herself, the Democratic Party, the ideology underlying, because that's the other thing is what were the governing parties that were rejected? And many of them
that's the key.
Many of them were, neoliberal parties. And it's one more reflection of the fact that the public is done with an ideology that has been proven to be broken, putting markets above human beings and, individual values. And Democrats have failed to recognize that this has been rejected and they have to offer a different story and a different ideology.
Let's go through that list, because it's actually very important. So we have the British Tories, right? The Tories basically abandoned all of the spirit of Brexit and pursued market-based Brexit, whatever the that is, under Rishi Sunak.
And Liz Truss to start with, too, which was the austerity.
Liz Truss. I mean, even Bojo, who I actually had a lot of respect for, Boris, back in the day, because he got himself elected mayor of London. That's not exactly the easiest thing. And then they have freaking Sadiq Khan, then goes on to become this very dynamic figure. But he bets the farm, all throughout COVID in the post-Brexit era on this market-managed Brexitism. It eventually evolves into Liz Truss after his own failure, and then, of course, Rishi Sunak. And in all cases, they abandoned the spirit of Brexit in the first place, which was about immigration. It wasn't just about the market. And so what happens is that the Reform Party under Nigel Farage now surges, takes all the energy away from the Tories, and leads to an immediate Labour victory. But in the UK, it's not an accident that even though Starmer may have gotten himself elected, he's almost immediately as unpopular as the Tories. What are we doing here?
And they also, with Corbyn, crushed their
they absolutely
left version of Bernieism, too.
And so in both cases, what you really have is you had the establishment forces in both the Tories and inside of Labour that try and crush them and keep the country on their, on this one-track direction. But the voters just keep saying, they're no, this is not what we are asking for. They also point to Emmanuel Macron and his, fall apart, really there. Macron bet the farm in 2017 on French, he they call it like Jupiterianism or something. It's basically like, call this like Napoleonic centrist figure, and he saw France as like the head of this liberal democratic European Union. And the French, of course, like, even though they kind of keep electing him, they also just keep grasping in different directions. And it's not a surprise that the, basically socialist leftist coalition and Le Pen have basically been battling it out ever since that happened. Again, it's the same fight that's happening over there. Theirs is actually way more intense than ours, or about the soul of France, about who we are, and it's about immigration, and it's also really about the like the future of their own welfare state, and also of their own conception of themselves, of whether they want to be like a French, like liberal, neoliberal managed economy, or they want to return to the roots that they've always had in their country. They even point to the Japanese liberal Democrats, which frankly is kind of an interesting one. I don't know a ton about Japan. I'll be there in 2 weeks, so I'm actually excited to learn. But that Liberal Democratic Party there actually lost its parliamentary majority for the first time in 15 years.
Yeah,
and that's another thing about Japan.
Japan, on all the countries that they polled about, like, how do you feel about Donald Trump? Israel was number one.
Yeah.
They fucking love Donald Trump in Israel.
Yes.
I think Japan was like towards the top of the list.
Yeah, the Japanese.
There was a large like pro-Trump sentiment in Japan.
Look, Japan, I mean, it's not a secret. This is a very conservative society. And I don't mean this in like the Christian sense, although I think some of them are Christian. But look, I mean, in terms of gender equality and their own, like what they view is like masculine and feminine ideals. Also in terms of their economy and all of that, actually aligns very, very much with Donald Trump. Also, Shinzo Abe and Trump were great friends, and they had a very good relationship in the past, so it makes sense. But I guess the point in all of these cases is that you have very highly developed societies like Japan, like the UK, even like France, but also, the newer ones like in India, where Narendra Modi also lost, some of his ground, despite being one of the most popular figures. I also would point to one of our own neighbors, Mexico. Like, look what happened, not only with the election of AMLO, but then the continuation of that and the literal falling apart of their like predominant I'm forgetting the name of that party that's there. And then also our other neighbor to the north, look at Canada. Canada, Justin Trudeau sounds like Donald Trump on immigration right now. He's like, we're done with immigration here, Canada. I hear you and I see you. Their party is very, very unpopular, and they also are poised for some major political realignment. So I think the case in all of them is that highly developed Western societies are asking what's next. And it's the first time since World War II, which is that's actually what Derek pointed out. And I actually think that's really apt, because what's happening here is that for the first time since World War II, we're asking fundamental questions about who we want to be in the global system and about our relationship to government. It was a titanic shock that they had to live through in such a short period of time. For us, it's actually been like a slow burning disaster since 2003 and the invasion, or I guess really since 9/11, then the invasion of Iraq, then the financial crisis, and almost 20 years of just like feeling tense and constantly voting for these change elections. Now, Trump has a chance to get that done and to actually forge some sort of new consensus, but each country has to ask itself, like, okay, what's like the relationship between the government and the citizen? What is the relationship of what the citizenry means in terms of immigration? And there's varying different ways that that's playing out across the West and in these developed societies. What, though, is our relationship to the globe? And that's another one where, I mean, I don't want to, put the death knell yet, but Atlanticism, which is like this worship of the alliance between Europe and the United States, like that's basically dead under Donald Trump. We are returning much more to a much more mercantilist, like transactional relationship. The rise of Asia, one of the reasons the Japanese love Trump is specifically because like he's very pro-global, like he's pro, quote unquote, fairness of trade. But more importantly, the Japanese have always felt shafted by the fact that we like love and respect like freaking Slovenia or whatever, and they're like a G7 economy sitting over there and like, hey, what about us? That realignment will happen too. So I know I've droned on a lot here, but there's that graph says everything, because if you think about it, Krystal, 1945, when the UK votes out Winston Churchill and puts Clement Attlee, that's when they're like, okay, we're done with empire and we're going NHS, we're going healthcare service. Same in a lot of the European countries. They were like, we're done with this whole like global project. We're just gonna kind of retreat inwards, I guess, a little bit and figure out who we are. America also chose a little bit differently under Truman and Eisenhower, but we're back to that type of moment, which is really interesting.
Yeah, well, what I want my liberal friends, and I love my libs out there, what I want them to understand is that the right didn't actually defeat them. Liberals and, Democratic Party elites who made it their project, their primary project, it's not defeating Donald Trump over the past basically decade. Their primary project was defeating the left-wing Bernie Sanders movement that was grassroots and populist, and especially the 2016 class first iteration. They made that their project, and they succeeded in that. I mean, it's crushed, it's done, right? There's no clear successor. Listen, maybe I'll be wrong. I've been wrong about a lot, but I don't see it. Mm-hmm. You all defeated the movement that had a chance to be a competing vision. And you mentioned AMLO and Claudia Sheinbaum. AMLO is, not exactly like Bernie Sanders. Obviously, it's a different cultural and political context, but a lot of similarities there. And he was one of the most popular leaders in the entire world, including through a time that did include, massive inflation and COVID and unrest, all that stuff. And he continued to be incredibly popular and was able to basically name his successor. As I mentioned before, just ask yourself, who were the strongest supporters of Bernie Sanders? What was his coalition? And it was predominantly working class. Many of the donors, contributors, was Walmart, Amazon, Starbucks. Remember how we used to cover that? Teachers also were a big part of that. It was predominantly working class. Latinos loved Bernie Sanders, T.O. Bernie. That was a 2020 iteration of Bernie in particular. They really capitalized on that support. And quote unquote, bros. And I think one thing we've missed in the conversation about like the bro exit from the Democratic Party is, this is a partial explanation, but you can go back and look at how were the male supporters of Bernie Sanders movement treated? Mm-hmm. They were, predominantly young men who were smeared as being toxic and sexist and racist. Like that's how they were treated. So, is it any surprise then that you have this significant rightward shift among men? I'm not saying that's everything that's going on, but if you look at the coalition that backed Bernie and you look at where they are now, I think it becomes pretty clear the Democratic Party instead bet on this college-educated, upper-class coalition in a country that is still predominantly non-college educated and working class. And these are the results. I mean, to me, that's pretty clear. So that's what I want people to really understand is that the Democrats, the liberals in the Democratic Party really did this to themselves by making it such a focus and succeeding beyond, anyone's wildest dreams in crushing the part of the party that had the most appeal to working class voters and had a chance, no guarantees, had a chance of actually competing with the vision of Trumpism. So, to me, like a lot of the die has already been cast. Like I'm not saying Democratic Party isn't going to win elections, win votes, whatever. But in terms of the ideological direction of that party, I think now it's going to be more, okay, well, how do we adopt? And we already see this with immigration. We already see this with crime. We already see this in a lot of ways. Trudeau going down the same path in Canada. How do we do like a kinder, gentler version of Trumpism? And, that'll sell. Bill Clinton, that's what he did in the 90s. He embraced neoliberalism, did a Democratic Party version of it. There will still be, don't get me wrong, there will still be very fierce surface level battles over things like immigration and cultural issues. But the underlying sort of narrative of the nation and economic direction, the general contours of that will be largely set. Again, I could be wrong, but I sort of feel like the die is already effectively cast.
I totally agree. I mean, that was actually, if anything, Trump's greatest victory is breaking the Overton window on all of these issues, from trade to immigration to foreign policy. And obviously there's been left-right, inter-coalitional fights. The left chose to stick with the old direction, specifically because of like God worship under Barack Obama. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.